Bonjour à tous, bienvenue à cette conférence de presse organisée par la Tribune de la presse parlementaire. We have with us this morning Raquel Dancho. She is the Conservative Shadow Minister for Public Safety, Dr. Stephen Ellis, Conservative Deputy Shadow Minister of Health. We have also Rick Perkins, Conservative Shadow Minister for Fisheries, Oceans and the Canadian Coast Guard. And I'm missing somebody here, I'm sorry. Who's the...
Oh, Mr. Dane Lloyd.
Thank you. We'll start off with remarks for about 20-25 minutes, and then we'll have the same amount of time for questions. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being with us. My name is Raquel Dancho. I'm the Member of Parliament for Kildonan and St. Paul in Winnipeg, Manitoba. I'm also the Shadow Minister for Public Safety for Canada and the Vice Chair of Canada's Standing Committee on Public Safety and National Security. Today, our committee begins its investigation into whether the Liberal government attempted to leverage the worst mass killing in Canadian history for political gain by inappropriately pressuring the Commissioner of the RCMP to release sensitive information to the public that could have jeopardized the active investigation into the Nova Scotia attacks of April 2020. There has been considerable legal testimony released by the Mass Casualty Commission, which is currently leading the inquiry into the Nova Scotia attacks, by multiple witnesses that supports this narrative that the Liberals inexcusably attempted to seize on the tragic deaths of 22 Canadians, including a pregnant woman, to further their political agenda. This is a very serious matter, and beyond the appalling nature of it, it also has the disturbing consequence of our elected government violating the independence of our national police force, which further fractures the faith Canadians have in our governing institutions and has severe consequences on the integrity of the RCMP, one of Canada's oldest institutions. Maintenant, un petit peu en français. Comme de nombreux Canadiens, nous pensons qu'il est temps que le gouvernement libéral dit aux Canadiens toute la vérité sur son ingérence politique dans l'enquête de la GRC sur la tuerie en Nouvelle-Écosse. Depuis le début de ce scandale, le gouvernement libéral a nié, bloqué et blâmé les autres. Il a caché des preuves auto-incriminantes à la CMC et a empêché des membres importants du gouvernement libéral de comparaître à cette audience du comité. Nous savons que dans les premiers jours qui ont suivi la tragédie, le commissaire Lucki de la GRC a averti le gouvernement libéral que la divulgation de détails sur les armes à feu utilisées nuirait à l'enquête en cours. Puis, à peine 5 jours plus tard, elle a dit à son personnel qu'elle avait promis au ministre Blair qu'il publierait dans ces détails pour soutenir le programme du gouvernement. Il s'est passé quelque chose pendant ce temps, et en affirmant qu'il n'y a pas eu de pression indue, le Premier ministre a admis qu'un certain niveau de pression a été exercé. Jusqu'à présent, le ministre Blair et le Premier ministre sont restés vagues et ont joué sur les mots pour éviter d'aller au fond des choses. Il faut que cela cesse. Les Canadiens méritent des réponses, pas d'autres dissimulations et jeux de la part du gouvernement libéral. The key evidence that we have been made aware of to date, in brief, is as follows. On April 23rd, 2020, RCMP Commissioner Brenda Lucki emailed the former Minister of Public Safety, Bill Blair's office, providing information they had requested concerning the weapons used in the attacks. In this email, Commissioner Lucki gives a strong warning that this information must not be shared beyond the Minister of Public Safety and the Prime Minister, because it pertained to the active investigation. To be clear, as of April 23rd, 2020, Commissioner Lucki was of the professional opinion, after decades of service in the RCMP, that sharing this information could jeopardize the investigation into the Nova Scotia attacks. So this was a very serious warning she provided to the Office of the Minister of Public Safety. However, only 5 days later, on April 28th, 2020, following a press conference and public briefing regarding the attacks led by then Nova Scotia RCMP Superintendent Darren Campbell, Commissioner Lucki summoned the Nova Scotia RCMP officials to an immediate meeting in which she reprimanded her deputies for failing to share this very same sensitive information concerning the weapons used in the attacks that only days prior she warned the Prime Minister and the Minister of Public Safety not to share. We still have not received a clear answer as to why she changed her mind so drastically in such a short period of time. And then on April 28th, in the April 28th, 2020 meeting, which we know was explosive, emotional, and full of anger on the part of Commissioner Lucki, and there were multiple witnesses who confirmed these were the events that transpired in that meeting. Notably, former Superintendent of the Nova Scotia RCMP, Darren Campbell's written notes, some of which said the following paraphrased remarks. Quote, "The Commissioner was obviously upset. The Commissioner said she had promised the Minister of Public Safety and the Prime Minister's office that the RCMP would release this information. The Commissioner then said that we didn't understand that this was tied to pending gun control legislation." Former Director of the Nova Scotia RCMP Communications, Leah Scanlon's testimony corroborates Darren Campbell's account of the events in this April 28th, 2020 meeting. Ms. Scanlon wrote in a letter to Commissioner Lucki the following year about this meeting, and the following are paraphrased remarks from her letter. Quote, "You didn't think our communications were strategic. It was a revealing moment, one where I realized we were not aligned. Our focus was on the families, not on the legislation passed on May 1st, 2020. And there she was referring to the Liberals' upcoming gun control policy. She went on to say, "Eventually you informed us of the pressure and the conversation with Minister Blair, which we clearly understood was related to the upcoming passing of the gun legislation." And there it was. "I remember a feeling of disgust," she said, "as I realized this was the catalyst for a conversation and perhaps the justification for what you were saying about us." She ended in saying, or the ending quote I will provide from her said the following: "The political lens was not our sole focus. I could not believe what you, the leader of our organization, was saying. I was embarrassed to be privy to what was unfolding. It was appalling, inappropriate, unprofessional, and extremely belittling." End quote. Ms. Scanlon has also said in an interview with The Inquiry regarding the haphazard and inaccurate release of the death count in the early days following the attacks between Nova Scotia RCMP, the Commissioner, and the Liberal government that, quote, "It was all political pressure, that it was 100% Minister Blair and the Prime Minister, and we have a Commissioner that does not push back." And Ms. Scanlon went on to say that Minister Blair and the Prime Minister, quote, "were weighing in on what we could and couldn't say during the media briefings." This account, in particular from Ms. Scanlon, suggests that the RCMP was being directed by the Liberal government, which would be a very serious and concerning matter that could jeopardize the integrity and the independence of the RCMP. Following this explosive meeting, late that night, Commissioner Lucki emailed Minister Blair's Chief of Staff and the Deputy Minister of Public Safety without any context in her email that the Nova Scotia RCMP press conference was, quote, "not the execution she was expecting." And again, there was no context surrounded in this email, which would insinuate that Minister Blair's office was aware that Commissioner Lucki wanted this sensitive information released, despite her warnings to those very same people only 5 days prior that information must not be released. So what happened in those 5 days that made the Commissioner change her mind so aggressively and so drastically? She is a 30-year professional in the RCMP, and it does not make sense that she came to this conclusion, this about-face, on her own. So was she pressured by the Liberal Minister of Public Safety, Minister Blair? Was she pressured by the Prime Minister's office, by the Prime Minister? And if not for pressure from the most powerful men in the country, what else could have made her change her mind? The answer is we don't know. But when the Prime Minister was asked about this, he replied in reference to Commissioner Lucki, quote, we did not put any undue pressure or influence. Undue meaning unwarranted or inappropriate or excessive pressure. Again, the Prime Minister said in regard to Commissioner Lucki, we did not put any undue influence or pressure on her. So, but that doesn't answer the question whether the Prime Minister felt there may have been appropriate pressure in his mind. And here again, we see the Prime Minister playing fast and loose with the words, which is not the first time we have seen him doing this. Canadians are very familiar with the Prime Minister denying wrongdoing and later being found that he was not telling the whole truth. We saw this very clearly during the SNC-Lavalin scandal with Jody Wilson-Raybould. The Prime Minister and his government are adept at denying, deflecting, and blaming others when they are caught with scandals involving serious ethical concerns. And as a reminder, the Prime Minister remains the only Prime Minister in history who have violated ethics laws on multiple occasions. Ultimately, police in Canada are to be independent from political influence and pressure when it comes to any investigation, especially one as serious as the worst mass killing in Canadian history. So to play with language is not only deceitful, but it is unacceptable and morally bankrupt. So concerning the committee proceedings today, our intention is to get answers, clarity, and honesty as to what transpired during the days following the Nova Scotia attacks. In particular, what made the Commissioner change her mind so drastically and so aggressively in only 5 days. We also intend to bring forward a motion today in committee calling for another meeting that includes Darren Campbell and Leah Scanlon, as they were unable to attend today's meeting, and they are, of course, very key witnesses to this investigation. We believe the motion we have crafted can be supported by all parties, and we call on all parties to support this and the continuation of this committee investigation and a commitment to full transparency and accountability from the Liberal government, as is our duty as members of the Standing Committee on Public Safety and National Security. And as Canada's official opposition, the Conservatives are charged with the duty to hold this government account for their actions, and we will continue to work relentlessly to fulfill that obligation today and in the weeks to come. And before I conclude in brief, I did want to thank the journalists who have researched and interviewed and written extensively on the RCMP scandal. Thank you for your hard work and for fulfilling your duties of keeping Canadians informed. And thank you again for being here today. And this concludes my formal remarks, and I welcome any questions you may have.
Merci beaucoup. On va commencer dans la salle, si vous voulez bien. Catherine Collin de CBC.
Hello. I'm wondering if you can sort of dig in a little bit more, Ms. Dancho, on what you were saying about the language that was used. You make the point that the Prime Minister spoke about undue pressure. Mr. Blair has said explicitly there was no pressure brought to bear, no interference with the operational decisions of the RCMP. Talk to me about where the line is for you in terms of what is appropriate vis-a-vis the discussions with the RCMP about this issue.
Thank you. I don't believe that any pressure would be appropriate in this circumstance. As the Prime Minister himself has said, as has the Minister of Public Safety, there is to be absolute independence on investigations. And again, this was the worst mass killing in Canadian history. I think that threshold would be even higher in that regard, that the police have complete independence when undertaking this investigation and when to release certain information. Now, we know that Commissioner Lucki did make it very clear when she was providing evidence on the weapons used, when she emailed the Minister of Public Safety's office, that that information was not to be shared beyond the Prime Minister and the Minister of Public Safety, that it would jeopardize the investigation, that it could. And then in only 5 days later, she changed her tune completely and reprimanded her deputies quite aggressively for not sharing that information publicly, which tells us that something transpired in that time that made her aggressively change her opinion. So regarding the testimony and the evidence from Darren Campbell of what was said in the room by Commissioner Lucki, she said that she promised the Minister of Public Safety and the Prime Minister's office that she would get this information released. Leah Scanlon also said similar and corroborated on those remarks in her written response to Commissioner Lucki, that Commissioner Lucki indicated there was pressure and a conversation from Minister Blair. So we have several pieces of testimony from reputable witnesses that Minister Blair and the Prime Minister's office did pressure, in fact, Commissioner Lucki. And that is what we believe changed her mind.
And yet, I mean, you are likely to hear more denials at committee today. So I wonder what you expect is going to be accomplished today.
We're hoping to fill some gaps in the evidence. So again, we see the email from Commissioner Lucki clearly taking the position on April 23rd. This information was not to be shared because it could jeopardize the investigation. That is very clear that she informed the Minister of Public Safety that. Then 5 days later, she changed her mind, as I said. So what transpired? Who talked to who during that time? What information was exchanged? We believe that Minister Blair will not be transparent, as he hasn't been. Someone is misleading the public. We're not sure who. We're hoping to find out today. I would hope that we can have faith in the RCMP Commissioner, that before the Public Safety Committee and Canadians that are watching, that she is transparent. She has not fully denied that there was political pressure. So we'd like to ask her that today.
Sarah Ritchie, Canadian Press.
Thanks. You talked at the beginning of your statement, Raquel, about like the issues that you have with the Liberal government, as you say, capitalizing on the worst mass shooting in Canadian history. I just want to ask you a question with some context. In the United States, every time there's a mass shooting, including in Uvalde, we see mass cries for gun legislation, for gun control, for some sort of change from government. That seems to be the rallying cry all of the time. In fact, I spoke with survivors of the Polytechnic shooting in Montreal who said all they've been asking for ever since that shooting is for government to make a change. How is it inappropriate for a government to see something horrific like this happen and then make change, which they had already promised?
I think what's inappropriate is if the Liberal government interferes in the most critical mass killing in the most critical investigation regarding the mass killing in Canadian history. There's supposed to be complete independence between the RCMP and the government. We have a commissioner who on April 23rd very clearly said the information concerning the weapons used in that mass killing was not to be shared because it would jeopardize the investigation. Now, I don't think that you're insinuating that the government had every right to jeopardize the most important and critical investigation in Canadian history. I don't think that you're insinuating that.
Obviously not.
Right. So if that's the case, then it would have been inappropriate for them to do so, to put pressure on the commissioner of the RCMP to go against her 30-year professional opinion that she should not, that information should not be shared. And yet 5 days later, she did change her opinion. And she did reprimand quite aggressively her deputies for not sharing that information. And yet only a few days prior, she had told the government that that information cannot be shared. So I think that that is the issue at hand. We cannot have political interference, and we certainly cannot have this type of political pressure or any political pressure from the Liberal government on the RCMP or the RCMP commissioner. That is the issue that we're looking into today.
And fair enough. I've heard your point on that but very clearly, but in all of your press releases to date on this subject, you've called out the Liberal government for inappropriately trying to capitalize on the worst mass killing in Canadian history. And so I'm asking you again, what part of taking action after a horrific tragedy such as the worst mass killing in Canadian history is inappropriate?
Again, I think when the commissioner of the RCMP, or head of the RCMP, gives the professional opinion that if that information regarding the weapons used in the mass killing was publicized, was made public, that would jeopardize the investigation. I think Canadians had full confidence in the RCMP that they would get down to the bottom of this. And so to think that the Liberal government would risk jeopardizing that critical investigation for political gain, I think is appalling and disgusting, and gross interference in the political independence of the RCMP. The idea that the Liberal government would put political gain over the integrity of the investigation is extremely serious, and that is why we have the Investigation of Public Safety Committee. That is why all parties agreed to investigate this. But I do believe we should refer to Dr. Stephen Ellis regarding how your constituents, Dr. Ellis represents the families of Portapique, how your constituents have responded to the allegations that the Liberal government has politically interfered in, or may have politically interfered and put political pressure on Commissioner Lucki to frankly violate her professional opinion that that information at that time should have remained confidential.
Well, thanks very much, Raquel, for that. And certainly I'm happy to be here today representing the people of Cumberland-Colchester. The people of Cumberland-Colchester want the answers. And all of this political interference leads us to believe that there's backdoor deals, that there's a lack of integrity in not only with the Liberal government, but how they interact with the RCMP. The other fact that we know very clearly is that part of this investigation was a cross-border investigation, which involved the FBI and the ATF in the United States, of course. Given the sensitive nature of that, I think it makes it incredibly important, obviously, that there's no interference between the executive branch and the judicial branch here in Canadian, on Canadian soil. And so when you look at those things combined together, you know, what people really want is to have faith in the systems that we have at hand. And we know that when there's political gerrymandering to influence investigations, that people lose their faith in those investigations. And when the faith is lost, then the whole process begins to unravel, which is what we're really beginning to see here, is that people in the Portapique area and all of those who've lost families and who've been tragically affected by this are unfortunately losing faith in this particular mass casualty commission and, of course, in the government as a whole. So I think the other part that we need to underscore, and I know Ms. Dancho did this, but it's very, very important to understand that this is a repeated pattern behavior of this government.
We will move now to questions online. I would ask people online if they want to ask a question to raise their virtual hand, please. We'll give them a few seconds. On va passer aux questions en ligne. Je demanderai aux gens qui sont branchés de lever la main s'ils ont une question à poser. Okay, let's try another way. Jacques Galland. Si vous avez une question, Toronto Star, Jacques Galland. Anybody with a question online, please raise your hand. maybe another round in the room if you guys are okay with that?
Absolutely.
Catherine?
I have a couple of follow-up questions. Specifically, Dr. Ellis, you said a moment ago, backdoor deals, which I think implies a sort of quid pro quo. What were you referencing there?
You know, I think what we need to understand here, you know, in the parlance that I may use as a physician or in my history in the military, when two people get together who have a similar history, perhaps two physicians or two military people, there's a way that people begin to discuss things. And I think that that's perhaps the explanation that we hear here is how Commissioner Lucki and Minister Blair got together and discussed things as police officers. And the sad part about that is that we saw a change in 5 days from the position to say, no, do not release this information, to yes, release this information. And, you know, the difficulty there is exactly what happened during those 5 days. What deals were made between Commissioner Lucki and Minister Blair to say, you know, things need to be different here. We're not getting the information we want. We're not putting it out there in the public. We don't know the answer to those questions, and those are the answers that Canadians want to know, that people from Cumberland Colchester want the answer to.
I suppose my point is that deal implies that, you know, you do something for me, I'll do something for you. Okay, fair enough. I would like to ask Ms. Dancho about something you said in French. You referenced the severe consequences for the integrity of the RCMP in French, and I would like you to speak just a little bit about what you believe, or what you're saying, I guess, are the consequences. You feel that this has already damaged the RCMP's reputation?
I think that the Canadians, over the last number of years, have had a number of questions and concerns about government institutions at large. There are, of course, a number of concerns regarding the RCMP handling of this investigation at the ground level and with the national headquarters as well. And as well with how the federal government undertook the implementation of the Mass Casualty Commission. So if it is found, if these allegations are proven to be true, if there's further corroboration on the testimony provided by Darren Campbell, Leah Scallon, and others, and it is found certainly that the Liberal government politically interfered and inappropriately pressured Commissioner Lucki to change her professional opinion from not sharing sensitive information to reprimanding her deputies for not doing that exact thing that she warned against, I think that that would set a very dangerous precedent that political interference is okay if the Liberal government feels that it is warranted. I think that there are serious long-term consequences of setting that precedent, that political interference and pressure are allowed from the government to the RCMP if they feel it is justified. We need to ensure that that is stopped and that does not become a precedent-setting event.
If I can just ask one more point of clarification. Sure. It seems to me at moments during all of this, in some cases you've talked about this as a prospective thing, if this is proven, but it seems to me that there are other moments that it seems already clear to you. Like you said, any amount of pressure is inappropriate, and you've basically suggested that you do believe that the government officials are lying about this. So is there a question in your mind? Is there something unresolved here about whether something wrong has gone on, or have you already made up your mind about this?
I do believe Darren Campbell's account of the event, that Commissioner Lucki promised the Minister and the Minister of Public Safety and the Prime Minister's office that she would have that information released. I also believe Leah Scanlon, when she wrote to the RCMP Commissioner, that the RCMP Commissioner said in that meeting that she was pressured and had a conversation with Minister Blair and that this was related to the upcoming gun control legislation. So I believe those two, and I believe the others that have corroborated this as well. I also believe the number of high-ranking former RCMP officials, including a former RCMP Commissioner, who have backed the integrity of Darren Campbell. So I think what we want to find out today is, what does Commissioner Lucki have to say about this? She hasn't had to respond to in-depth questions from members of the opposition. Today she has that opportunity. I hope that she is truthful and sheds more light on this. Again, she has not fully denied that there was political pressure. And Minister Blair also has not been questioned at length. He has been, of course, questioned by media, but he has not been questioned at length by members of the opposition. So today we have that opportunity. We also have other RCMP officials who are in the room. We'd like to see if they corroborate the the events that Leah Scanlon and Darren Campbell have said. So again, if there are a number of people in that room who say this in fact happened, a promise was, Commissioner Lucki did say there was a promise, there was pressure, there was a conversation, that's what she said, I think that further adds information to the public discourse that these events did in fact happen. But again, we want to give the opportunity for Commissioner Lucki and others to respond to our questions, and I think it's important to be cautious with our language.
Sarah, another question?
So, as you mentioned, this is one of the first opportunities that parliamentarians will have to hear from a lot of the high-ranking officials who were involved in that investigation. I'm curious, as my colleague mentioned, you might just get stonewalled. You might hear more denials today. Is there any intent from your group to take this opportunity to try to find out more about what was going on behind the scenes in that investigation, to find out more about why Commissioner Lucki was, as the testimony has said, so angry with the communications?
Absolutely. That will certainly be a focus of our questioning today. Absolutely.
Okay.
I think we have a question online from Dylan Robertson. Dylan, the floor is yours.
Hi there. A question for Ms. Dancho. I'm just wondering if you're planning to seek documents or records of communications, and if you can speak to the extent of that, if you started to piece together what a request from the committee might look like, how extensive we're talking, or if you feel that the commission sort of already had enough of a dragnet of files.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Robertson, for your question. I think that it would be pertinent for us to request documents if the responses that we hear today lead us to want to see various documents, perhaps if it's mentioned that there are outstanding notes that have not been provided. There are a number of things that could come up today. So we're going to play it by ear, see what comes up, and whatever is required, we will certainly request that the individuals, that the written document, that have documents, provide those to the committee. Again, this is meeting one of what we expect will be an extensive committee investigation into this. This is our first day. We're going to see how it goes. But certainly, if it's found that there are any documents outstanding that have not been reviewed by the public, then certainly we would ask for those.
Follow up, Dylan?
Sure, and I'm just wondering when it comes to confidentiality of documents, just given the sort of lack of answers that you've gotten so far, if you're prepared to have that as a reason for these documents, if you have any thoughts on how to meet that balance between transparency and protecting confidential information, if your committee's put any thought into dealing with that issue.
Well, we certainly can't control what the government redacts, as we know, and this brings up another issue that I didn't mention today, but that you're all aware of, and that's the Department of Justice withheld the 4 key pages of Darren Campbell's notes, which I've outlined extensively today. They initially withheld those for quite some time, despite providing 132 pages of his other notes, but they mysteriously withheld those 4 pages. So we've put forward this motion already, and it will be included in our motion today, that Minister David Lametti and officials should be invited to committee to answer as to why those 4 pages in particular was heard. This is also bolstered by the MCC's second subpoena that they submitted recently to the federal government, demanding that they release all documents relevant to this investigation, indicating that they are not convinced that the Liberal government has been forthcoming with all documents. So we expect that they will answer that subpoena quickly and with transparency, and we expect the same degree of accountability in committee today and in the weeks to follow.
Madame Dancho, est-ce que vous permettez que je vous pose une dernière question en français? Comme il n'y en a pas eu, est-ce que vous voulez essayer ou vous n'êtes pas à l'aise? C'est comme vous préférez.
Si vous voulez, I'll try.
On s'essaie. D'après vous, quelle est la preuve la plus accablante en ce moment qu'il y a eu pression de la part du bureau du premier ministre ou de M. Blair à l'endroit de Mme Lucki? Quel est peut-être l'indice ou la preuve que vous avez entre vos mains en ce moment qui vous permet de dire il y en a eu?
Je pense que la meilleure preuve est les notes de Darren Campbell qui dit que le commissioner a promis à ministre Blair et le bureau de la première ministre qu'elle va avoir cette information released à la public. Puis aussi la lettre de Leah Scanlon qui dit plus ou moins les mêmes choses. Donc, les deux, je pense, c'est la meilleure preuve de cette of this charge.
Merci beaucoup, c'est très apprécié. Merci à tous. On va vous laisser aller au comité. Bonne journée. Thank you so much. Thanks to everybody. Thanks to the translators. Thanks to the team of the press gallery.
Merci beaucoup.